Despite not publicly showing any interest in serving in the ANC's top six, Joel Netshitenzhe is being endorsed by the Veterans League and branches to become the party's next national chairperson. Now, the position is currently held by Joel Netshitenzhe. For some insight on this, we're joined by Asanda Ngoasheng, a political analyst. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Despite not publicly showing any interest in serving in the ANC's top six, Joel Netshitenzhe is being backed by the Veterans League to become the party's next national chairperson. Does this come as a surprise, especially for a candidate who really has been keeping a pretty low profile at a time when most are working on getting endorsements from branches and are visible on the campaign trail?
It's not a surprise because the ANC has a history of bringing back its leaders when it requires certain skills. And I think, Joel Netshitenzhe has a history and a track record of being very good at policy, and he's a technocrat. And so he's somebody that would be good for the ANC to have in order for them to be more strategic, in order for them to think through their decisions a lot more. So I'm not surprised that his name is being bandied about.
Netshitenzhe is a seasoned politician who at one stage was considered to be next in line for the party's top job. How much do we know about him? And is it enough for him to bag the position?
Yeah, I think we know enough about him. I think during the Thabo Mbeki era, he was quite popular and he's written quite a lot. So there is some sense that publicly we have an understanding on where he is or where he stands on certain policy issues. And as I said, during the Thabo Mbeki era, he was quite heavily involved in policy making. And so those who were in policy making spaces would have interacted with him and would have understood him to be a technocrat and somebody who is passionate about policy analysis and how to implement policy, which is something that the ANC has really struggled with, in kind of the past decade or so. Because if you look at even where the government is now, for the longest time they were still running on policies and strategies that were actually written by Joel Netshitenzhe and some of his colleagues at the time. And it's only recently that sort of newer and more kind of Cyril Ramaphosa focused strategies have actually come into place. And so to this day, a lot of the policies that are in place are actually a genesis from his era.
And perhaps, in really expanding the discussion around the Veterans League, the weight and the significance of the Veterans League at national elective conferences, how much of an impact they have, and the number of delegates that also come there with their own voice, how much work does the league embody?
So I didn't get that.
Just looking at the Veterans League and its significance come conference. I mean, we know that they usually have 40 delegates. Just talking perhaps to the significance, as the Veterans League has been speaking now about who they think should be in certain key positions.
And I think the veterans do have some level of influence, and I think that there has been in the past some attempts to bring in candidates who would appease them. My only concern is, yes, I think it would be good to bring in a Joel Netshitenzhe. We do need his kind of history and his kind of technocratic policy knowledge, but I'm hoping that we're going to be seeing soon some young names starting to come up, because in the main, the people who have been, put to the forefront are mainly people who are quite old. And there's nothing wrong with, our government having people who are older, but it is important that we are living in an era that requires people who have experience of being an ordinary South African in the post-1994 era. We are dealing with issues that we have never had to deal with before. So just by way of an example, South Africa is one of the countries that's lagging behind on dealing with cybercrime, for example. And these are things that need young people who have much more depth and understanding, who are digital natives and, understand what it means to live online, and how, what strategies are being used for scams, for phishing, and for all those kind of things. And so we do need much younger blood to come through and think through how to solve some of the problems of South Africa. And while it's good to bring some old names back, some intellectual, brain trust into the ANC, it's going to be important for them to show us that they also have young people who understand current issues and will be able to develop good policies for current issues. Because if you think about even issues like housing, for example, we can't still be looking at the issue of housing through an RDP lens when we know that some of the people that we're dealing with now who are homeless are young people who are looking even just for some level of council housing, some level of subsidization of rent, etc. And so we need to look at a multiplicity of solutions to solve old problems. And if we are bringing in people who are coming from, an era closer to 1994, we're likely to see some post-1994 recycling of ideas and thinking. But what we do need is some really fresh ideas, and those are likely to come from much younger people who have an idea what it means to be a young person in South Africa. And I'm talking people from the ages of 18 to 35, but I'm also talking people who are at least between the ages of 35 and 45, because right now the majority of the people and the names that are being bandied about are at least 60 years old, which is a worrying sign for a country that has such a young population.
Yeah. As you speak about solving problems and the challenges when it comes to the future of the ANC and really observing what's happening internally and externally with, for instance, the decline in electoral support, how will the party need to position itself coming out of conference next month and perhaps in the build-up?
I think the ANC conference is still a relevant thing for South Africans to watch, because even if the ANC's power declines and it gets less than 50%, it's still going to be the largest opposition in South Africa. We've seen this even in the municipalities where the ANC has lost power. Some of them it's managed to get them back because they still remain to be the largest voting bloc in these institutions. And so their influence cannot be underestimated. Whether they gain more than 50% or they sit at under 50%, they're still a very important player that we cannot underestimate and that we need to understand and also be able to critique and engage properly.
Yeah. What do you make of the other names that are being lobbied about in terms of nominations, and also looking at gender matters, looking at the number of women and men? I mean, are we still... I haven't heard in a long time the talk around a female president. Where are we standing as a country as we look at the caliber of leaders and women within government and the ruling party?
I think it's quite sad for me to notice that, in the same way that I'm saying we're not getting young people coming through in terms of the nominations, we're also not getting enough names of women leadership coming through in terms of the nominations, and women leadership that actually stands a chance, and women leadership that is not tainted by its past, connections. So, for example, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is one of the people that I'm talking about who's tainted by her connections to Jacob Zuma, and the fact that a lot of people look to her as a proxy or a stand-in for Jacob Zuma and don't consider her and her leadership on its own. And I think it's sad because she does have a very good track record of leadership, but because of her connections to Jacob Zuma, many people do not trust her and do not trust that she'll be able to act independently without being used as a proxy by Jacob Zuma, who she has to this day not distanced herself from. And I think, when you look at Lindiwe Sisulu, it's also a similar problem. I've heard people saying that she thinks she's the royalty of South African politics, and a lot of people don't rate her much and don't think of her as somebody who's capable of the kind of leadership that South Africa needs. And I think we need more women names to be bandied about. We need more women to stand forward and to, put their names even forward, because this country is majority youth and majority women, and we need political leadership that is majority youth and majority women, because the people who are feeling the brunt of South Africa and all its complications are in the main youth and in the main women. And so you need those to be the people who are decision makers. You need those to be the people who are involved in the policy making processes as well as involved in the implementation. Because again, with the Joel Netshitenzhe coming in, it's going to be good from a policy development perspective. But what does it mean for implementation? Are we thinking about people who are implementers as well as the brains trust? And how will this all have an impact on the government that comes out of 2024 elections and its ability to deal with South Africa and the current problems facing us, and of course the historic links of those current problems?
Yeah, very well. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in on this conversation. Asanda Ngoasheng, political analyst.